The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the general store in Stockton, California, and Olivia Morgan stumbled out onto the dusty street with nothing but a carpet bag and a heart full of determination, though the summer heat of 1878 nearly knocked her back inside the coach. She had traveled from Boston after her father's death, inheriting his small parcel of land on the outskirts of this dusty cattle town. And as she looked around at the sun-bleached buildings and the men lounging outside the saloon across the street, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The air smelled of horse manure and something cooking, maybe beans, and the sound of a piano playing badly drifted from somewhere down the street. A woman in a faded calico dress looked her over from the boardwalk, taking in her proper traveling suit and the hat that had somehow stayed pinned to her auburn hair despite the jarring journey. Olivia nodded politely, but the woman just turned away, disappearing into the general store without a word. The stagecoach driver tossed her trunk down with a thud that made her wince, tipped his hat without meeting her eyes, and climbed back onto his seat. Within moments, the coach was rattling away, leaving her alone in a town where she knew absolutely no one. She picked up her carpet bag and looked around for someone who might direct her to the land office. A couple of cowboys walked past, their spurs jingling, and one of them looked her over with an expression she could not quite read. She straightened her spine and walked toward the general store, determined not to show how nervous she felt. Inside, the store was dim and cooler than the street, and the woman who had ignored her outside was now behind the counter, counting coins into the register. An older man with spectacles looked up from arranging canned goods on a shelf. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his voice kind enough. "I need directions to the land office," Olivia said. "I inherited property from my father, Harold Morgan." The woman behind the counter looked up sharply. "Morgan, that old drunk who tried to farm the hardpan out past the creek." Olivia felt her face flush hot. "My father was not a drunk. He was a dreamer." The woman shrugged. "Same thing out here, miss. Dreams do not put food on the table." The man with the spectacles cleared his throat. "Land office is 3 doors down on this side of the street. You will see the sign. But I should warn you that property has not been worked in 2 years. Your father passed, God rest him, and the place has been sitting empty since." "I am aware," Olivia said stiffly. "Thank you for your help." She walked out before either of them could say anything else, her cheeks still burning. The land office was exactly where the man had said, and inside she found a balding clerk who looked at her as though she were a curiosity in a traveling show. "Miss Morgan," he said after she introduced herself. "Yes, we received word of your father's passing. I have the deed here. But I must tell you, there is nothing out there but a falling-down cabin and 20 acres of dirt that has never grown anything but sagebrush." "Then I will grow sagebrush," Olivia said, holding out her hand for the deed. The clerk blinked at her, then handed over the papers. "You will need supplies. Water. The creek runs dry most of the summer, and you will need protection. There have been cattle rustlers in the area, and the ranch hands can get rowdy on Saturday nights." "I will manage," Olivia said, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. She left the land office with the deed clutched in her hand, and walked back to the general store to inquire about hiring a wagon to take her and her trunk out to the property. The man with spectacles, who introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, told her he could arrange it for the next morning, and he recommended she stay the night at the boarding house run by Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed when her husband died of fever. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was clean and quiet, and the woman herself was stern but fair. She showed Olivia to a small room on the 2nd floor, with a narrow bed and a washstand. and told her supper would be served at 6 o'clock. That evening, Olivia sat in the dining room with 3 other boarders. A traveling salesman who talked too much about his inventory of patent medicines, an elderly woman who said nothing at all, and a young man who worked at the bank and kept stealing glances at Olivia when he thought she was not looking. She ate her stew and cornbread in silence, wondering what her father had seen in this harsh land that had made him leave everything behind in Boston. The next morning, Mr. Henderson himself drove her out to the property in a wagon loaded with her trunk and some supplies he had insisted she would need: flour, beans, coffee, a lantern, matches, and a rifle she had no idea how to use. The ride took nearly an hour, following a rutted track that led away from town and into rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and dry grass. The sun was already hot, and Olivia could feel sweat trickling down her back beneath her dress. When they finally stopped, she looked at the cabin her father had built and felt her heart sink. It was smaller than she had imagined, just one room with a sagging roof and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. The windows were broken, and something had made a nest in the corner of the porch. "It needs work," Mr. Henderson said diplomatically. "It needs a miracle," Olivia replied. He helped her unload the supplies in her trunk, stacking everything on the porch. "You sure you want to stay out here alone, miss? It is not safe for a woman by herself." "I will be fine," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. Mr. Henderson shook his head but climbed back onto the wagon. "If you need anything, come back to town. Do not try to tough it out if things go bad." She watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing in a cloud of dust, and then she turned to face her new home. The silence was enormous, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk and the whisper of wind through the dry grass. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. For the next 3 days, Olivia worked from dawn until dark, cleaning the cabin, patching the roof as best she could, and trying to make the place livable. She discovered a well behind the cabin, and though the water was brackish, it was better than nothing. She hung blankets over the broken windows and swept out years of accumulated dirt and debris. At night, she lay in her narrow cot and listened to the coyotes howling in the hills, and she thought about her father and why he had come to this God-forsaken place. On the 4th day, she was trying to fix the broken door when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a rider approaching. As he came closer, her breath caught in her throat. He was the biggest man she had ever seen, sitting astride a massive black horse that looked like it could carry twice his weight without straining. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as an ox yoke, and as he rode into her yard, she felt a flutter of fear in her chest. The man reined in his horse and sat looking down at her for a long moment. He wore a dusty black hat pulled low over his eyes, a faded blue shirt, and leather chaps stained with dirt and sweat. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and she could see the worn grip of a revolver. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. He had dark hair that curled over his collar and eyes so blue they seemed unreal in the harsh sunlight. Olivia realized she was staring and forced herself to speak. "Can I help you?" The man dismounted, and she took an involuntary step backward. He was even bigger than she had thought, towering over her 5'4" frame. But then he did something unexpected. He took off his hat, holding it in his large hands, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost had to strain to hear it. "Did not mean to startle you, madam," he said, his tone gentle and low. "I am Preston Young. I work for the Double Bar Ranch about 5 miles west of here. My boss, Mr. Garrett, sent me to check on this property. We heard someone had moved in." She relaxed slightly, though her heart was still racing. "I am Olivia Morgan. This was my father's land." Preston nodded slowly, still speaking in that soft, careful voice as though he were trying not to frighten a skittish horse. "I remember your father. Good man. I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Did you know him well?" Olivia asked, surprised. "We talked a few times when he came into town." "He had ideas about farming, but the land out here is not kind to farmers. It is grazing land, cattle country." Preston glanced around at the cabin, at the broken windows and sagging roof. "This is no place for a woman alone, Miss Morgan. It is dangerous." "I have nowhere else to go," Olivia said, lifting her chin. "And this is my land. I intend to make something of it." Preston looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious. "You got water. There is a well. That well runs dry by August. You got food. Some supplies from town. You know how to shoot that rifle." He nodded toward the gun Mr. Henderson had sold her, which was leaning against the porch railing. Olivia hesitated. "Not yet." Preston sighed and settled his hat back on his head. "Miss Morgan, I do not mean to be forward, but you are going to get yourself killed out here. Just last week, some rustlers ran off 50 head of cattle from the double bar. They are still in the area. And that is not even counting the regular dangers, rattlesnakes, cougars, wolves. You need help." "I can manage," Olivia said stubbornly. "I am sure you can," Preston said, his voice still gentle, "but you do not have to do it alone." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I could come by every few days, check on you, teach you to shoot. Help with some of the heavier work around here. No charge, just being neighborly." Olivia studied him, trying to read his intentions. He seemed sincere, and there was something in his eyes that made her trust him, despite his intimidating size. "Why would you do that?" "Because your father was a good man, and he would want someone looking after you," Preston said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do." She thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but I can pay you for your time." "No need," Preston said. He walked over to the rifle and picked it up, checking it over with practiced ease. "This is a decent gun, but it has not been cleaned in a while. You got oil and rags." "I think so," Olivia said, going into the cabin to look through her supplies. For the next hour, Preston showed her how to clean and load the rifle, his voice never rising above that quiet, gentle tone. His hands were enormous, scarred and calloused from hard work, but he handled the gun with surprising delicacy. He explained everything patiently, repeating instructions when she did not understand, never making her feel foolish for not knowing. "Now," he said, once the rifle was clean and loaded, "let me show you how to aim." He set up a row of empty cans on a fence post about 20 yards away, then came back and showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. The gun was heavy, and her arms started to shake after holding it up for more than a minute. "Here," Preston said, and before she could protest, he stepped behind her, his arms coming around to help support the rifle. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, smell the scent of leather and horse and something clean like soap. "Like this. See how much easier it is when you are not fighting the weight." Olivia could barely breathe. She had never been this close to a man who was not her father, and the sheer size of Preston was overwhelming. But he was being so careful, so gentle, that she found herself relaxing into the support he offered. "Now squeeze," he whispered near her ear, his voice still soft. She squeezed the trigger, and the rifle kicked back into her shoulder with a force that would have knocked her down if Preston had not been there to catch her. The gun flew off the fence post, spinning away into the dirt. "You did it," Preston said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He stepped back, giving her space, and she turned to look up at him. "I did," she said, surprised and pleased. They spent another hour practicing, and by the end of it, Olivia was hitting the cans more often than not. Her shoulder was sore, and her ears were ringing, but she felt a sense of accomplishment she had not experienced in a long time. "You are a quick learner," Preston said, taking the rifle from her and checking it over one last time before handing it back. "Keep this loaded and near you at all times. And if you see anyone you do not know, fire a warning shot. I will hear it from the ranch and come running." "Thank you," Olivia said, meaning it. "I appreciate your help." Preston nodded and walked back to his horse. He mounted with an easy grace that belied his size, settling into the saddle as though he were born there. "I will be back in a couple of days, Miss Morgan. In the meantime, stay safe." She watched him ride away, his broad back straight in the saddle, and she realized she was smiling. For the first time since arriving in Stockton, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. Over the next 2 weeks, Preston came by every few days, always in the late afternoon when his work at the double bar was finished. He helped her fix the roof, shore up the porch, and clear a small patch of ground where she might try to plant a garden come spring. He brought her fresh meat from the ranch, always refusing any payment, and he continued teaching her about life on the frontier. How to read the weather, how to spot signs of predators, how to preserve food for the winter. Olivia found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that surprised her. She told herself it was just because she was lonely, because he was helpful, but she knew it was more than that. There was something about Preston that drew her, something beyond his obvious physical strength. He was kind and patient, thoughtful in a way that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. And he never treated her like she was foolish or weak, even when she made mistakes. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, Olivia asked him about his life. "Have you always been a ranch hand?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his big hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "No, madam. I grew up in Missouri on a farm. My pa was a blacksmith, and I helped him in the forge from the time I was big enough to hold a hammer. But when the war came, everything changed." "The war?" Olivia asked, though she knew he meant the Civil War. "I was just a boy when it started, but by the time I turned 16, they were taking anyone who could hold a rifle. I lied about my age and joined up. Fought for 3 years before the war ended." His voice was still soft, but there was a sadness in it that made Olivia's heart ache. "When I came back, my pa was dead. My ma had remarried and moved to St. Louis, and the farm was gone. So I came west, looking for work. Ended up in Stockton about 5 years ago, and Mr. Garrett gave me a job at the double bar." "Do you like it?" "The ranch work?" Preston considered the question. "It is honest work. Hard but honest. And Mr. Garrett is a fair man. He pays on time and treats his hands decent. Could be worse." "But it is not what you would have chosen," Olivia said, hearing the unspoken words. "No, madam. I always thought I would be a blacksmith like my pa." "But life does not always go the way you plan." He looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "What about you? What brought you all the way from Boston to this place?" Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "My father left when I was 12. He said he was going to make his fortune out west, that he would send for me and my mother once he got established. But he never did. My mother died of fever 2 years ago, and I worked as a seamstress to support myself. Then 6 months ago, I received a letter from a lawyer in Stockton saying my father had passed and left me this land. I had nothing keeping me in Boston, so I came." "That must have been hard," Preston said quietly. "Leaving everything you knew, it was. But staying would have been harder." "At least here I have a chance to build something of my own." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You are braver than you think, Miss Morgan." She felt herself blush and looked away. I do not feel brave. Most of the time I feel terrified. That is what bravery is, Preston said. Doing what needs to be done, even when you are scared. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, scattered like diamonds across the darkness. Olivia found herself thinking that she could get used to this, these quiet evenings with Preston. It was a dangerous thought, one she tried to push away, but it kept coming back. 3 days later, Olivia was hanging laundry on a line she had strung between 2 posts when she heard shouting in the distance. She dropped the wet sheet she was holding and grabbed the rifle, which was never far from her reach. 3 men on horseback were riding hard toward her cabin, and as they got closer, she could see they were chasing a 4th rider. Her heart pounding, Olivia raised the rifle and fired a warning shot into the air, just as Preston had taught her. The sharp crack echoed across the hills, and the 3 men reined in their horses, looking toward the cabin. The 4th rider, who was closer now, veered toward her, leaning low over his horse's neck. It was Preston. He galloped into the yard and practically threw himself off his horse, running toward her. "Get inside," he said, his voice urgent but still controlled. "Now." Olivia did not argue. She ran into the cabin with Preston right behind her. He slammed the door shut and dropped the bar across it, then moved to the window, his gun already in his hand. "Who are they?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. "Rustlers. The ones who have been hitting the ranches around here. I caught them trying to drive off some of Mr. Garrett's cattle, and they chased me when I spooked their horses." Preston's jaw was tight, his eyes focused on the men outside. "Stay down and stay quiet." Through the broken window, Olivia could see the 3 men had dismounted and were standing in a line, their guns drawn. One of them, a lean man with a scarred face, called out, "Come on out, Cowboy. We just want to talk." "Nothing to talk about," Preston called back, his voice calm. "You are on private property. Ride on before someone gets hurt." The scarred man laughed. "You think you can take all 3 of us? That is mighty optimistic." "I do not want trouble," Preston said, "but I will defend this land and the lady who owns it. Your choice." There was a long, tense silence. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She looked at Preston, at the determined set of his jaw and the steady hand holding his gun, and she realized with a shock that she trusted him completely. This man who had been a stranger just a few weeks ago was now standing between her and danger, willing to risk his life for her. "All right," the scarred man finally said. "We will go, but you tell your boss to keep his nose out of our business. Next time, we might not be so understanding." The 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, kicking up dust as they went. Preston stayed at the window, watching until they were out of sight. Then he let out a long breath and holstered his gun. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning to Olivia. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I am fine. Are you hurt?" "No, madam. They never got close enough." He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging his hat, which fell to the floor. "I am sorry I brought trouble to your door." "You saved me," Olivia said, and without thinking she stepped forward and threw her arms around him. For a moment, Preston stood completely still, as though he did not know what to do. Then, very carefully, his arms came around her, and she felt the strength in them, the gentle way he held her despite his size. She pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heart beating fast beneath the worn fabric of his shirt, and she realized she was crying. "Hey," Preston whispered, his voice soft and soothing. "It is all right. You are safe, I promise." She did not know how long they stood there, but eventually her tears subsided, and she became aware of how close they were, how good it felt to be held by him. She pulled back, embarrassed, and wiped her eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "I do not know what came over me." No need to apologize, Preston said gently. He picked up his hat and turned it over in his hands, not looking at her. Miss Morgan, I need to tell you something. What is it? He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was even quieter than usual. I know I am just a ranch hand, and you are an educated woman from the city. I know I got no right to speak, but these past few weeks, getting to know you, helping you out here, it has meant a lot to me. More than I can say. And if those rustlers had hurt you today, I do not know what I would have done. Olivia's breath caught. Preston. Let me finish, he said, still not looking at her. I am not good with words, and I know I am probably making a fool of myself, but I need you to know. I care about you, Olivia. More than I should. And if you will let me, I would like to keep coming around, not just to help with the chores, but because I want to. Because I want to see you, talk to you, be near you. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She reached out and touched his arm, and he finally looked at her, those blue eyes vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I want that too, she said softly. I look forward to your visits more than anything else in my week. You make me feel safe and valued, and when you are not here, I miss you. Preston's face transformed with a smile so bright and genuine that it took her breath away. You mean that? I do, Olivia said, and she found herself smiling back. He took a step closer, then hesitated. May I kiss you? In answer, Olivia rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and sweet, his big hands coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Olivia felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. I have been wanting to do that for weeks, Preston admitted, his forehead resting against hers. So have I, Olivia whispered. They stood there in the dim cabin, holding each other, and Olivia knew that her life had just changed forever. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face, she wanted to face them with this gentle giant of a man by her side. Over the next several months, Preston courted Olivia in a way that was both old-fashioned and utterly charming. He brought her wildflowers that he picked on his rides, small tokens that made her smile. He took her into town on Sunday afternoons, and they walked together through Stockton's dusty streets, ignoring the stares and whispers of the townspeople who could not understand what a refined woman from Boston saw in a rough ranch hand. Olivia did not care what they thought. She knew Preston in ways they never would. She knew he was smart and thoughtful, that he could quote poetry he had memorized as a boy, that he had a gift for working with his hands and could fix almost anything. She knew he was gentle with animals and children, that he always spoke softly because his father had been a violent drunk, and Preston had sworn he would never be like that. She knew he had nightmares sometimes about the war, and on those nights when he stayed late talking with her on the porch, she could see the shadows in his eyes and wished she could take away his pain. He learned about her too, about the loneliness of her childhood after her father left, about the years of struggling to make ends meet in Boston, about the dreams she had harbored of a different life. He listened when she talked about wanting to make something of this land, not to get rich but to prove to herself that she could survive, that she could be strong. You are the strongest person I know, Preston told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset. You came out here with nothing and built a life. That takes real courage. I had help, Olivia said, leaning against his shoulder. I could not have done it without you. You would have found a way, Preston said, wrapping his arm around her, but I am glad I could be here with you. As summer turned to fall and the air began to cool, Preston brought up the subject that had been hovering between them for weeks. Olivia, he said, his voice hesitant, I have been thinking about us, about the future. She looked up at him, her heart beginning to race. What about it? I do not have much to offer you. I make decent wages at the double bar and I have saved some money, but I am not a rich man. I probably never will be. But I love you. I have loved you since the first day I rode up to this cabin and saw you trying to fix that door, so determined and stubborn and brave. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. This was my grandmother's. My ma gave it to me before she remarried, said I should save it for the woman I wanted to marry. I know it is not fancy, but it is perfect, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. And yes, yes, I will marry you. Preston let out a whoop of joy so loud it startled his horse, which had been dozing nearby. He picked Olivia up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he kissed her so thoroughly that she forgot to breathe. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Stockton. Mr. Garrett and his wife stood up for them, along with Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, who had become a friend to Olivia. The townsfolk came out of curiosity more than anything else, but Olivia did not care. All she cared about was Preston, standing beside her in his best clothes, his hand gripping hers so tightly she thought he might never let go. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Preston kissed her, there was a smattering of applause. They walked out of the church into the bright October sunshine, and Preston helped her into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. Someone had tied tin cans to the back, and they rattled all the way out to the cabin that was now their home. Preston had been working on the place in secret for weeks, surprising Olivia with improvements. He had built a proper kitchen addition onto the side of the cabin, with a new stove that Mr. Garrett had given them as a wedding present. He had fixed the windows and added shutters, reinforced the roof, and built a real bed frame to replace the cot Olivia had been sleeping on. He had even started work on a small barn for the horses and the milk cow they hoped to buy come spring. You did all this? Olivia asked, looking around in wonder. I wanted you to have a real home, Preston said, looking embarrassed. I know it is not much, but it is everything, Olivia said, hugging him tight. It is perfect. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Preston treating her with the same gentleness he always showed, never rushing, always making sure she was comfortable. Olivia had been nervous, having no experience with such intimacy, but Preston's patience and care made it easy to relax into his arms. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, and Olivia traced the scars on his chest, the marks of the hard life he had lived. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Preston replied, his deep voice rumbling in his chest. More than I ever thought possible. Life settled into a rhythm over the winter. Preston continued working at the double bar, but now he came home every night to Olivia and the cabin they shared. They ate dinner together, talking about their days, making plans for the spring. On Sundays, they went to church and then visited with the few friends they had made in town. Mr. Garrett had warmed to Olivia, appreciating her intelligence and her determination to make something of the land, and he offered Preston a partnership in a new venture he was starting, breeding horses for the army. It would mean more money, Preston told Olivia one night. Enough that maybe you would not have to worry so much about making ends meet, but it would also mean longer hours, time away from home. We will manage, Olivia said. This is a good opportunity. You should take it. And so Preston became a junior partner in Garrett's horse breeding operation, and their financial situation improved dramatically. By spring, they were able to buy the milk cow they had wanted, along with some chickens and a pair of pigs. Olivia planted a garden, and to her delight, things actually grew in the rich soil near the creek. She had tomatoes and beans, squash and melons, more than enough for the two of them with plenty left over to preserve for winter. Life was good. better than Olivia had ever imagined. But as the first anniversary of their wedding approached, she realized something was different. She had missed her monthly courses twice now, and she was feeling sick in the mornings. When she finally worked up the courage to tell Preston, he looked at her with such joy and wonder that she started crying. "A baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Olivia said, laughing through her tears. "In the spring, I think." Preston picked her up gently, so careful now as though she were made of glass. "I am going to be a father," he said, and she could hear the emotion in his voice. "I promise, Olivia, I will be a good father. I will never raise my voice to our child. I will never raise my hand. I will love them and protect them always." "I know you will," Olivia said, cupping his face. "You are the best man I have ever known." The pregnancy was not easy. Olivia was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down, and Preston fretted over her constantly. He brought her peppermint tea that Mrs. Chen swore would help with the nausea, and he held her hair when she was sick, never complaining. As her belly grew, he was fascinated by it, talking to the baby and feeling for kicks, his big hands gentle on her swollen stomach. "I think it is a boy," he said one night. "He kicks like a mule." "It could be a girl," Olivia pointed out. "Girls can be strong too." "True," Preston agreed. "Either way, they are going to be tall. Look at these kicks. This is going to be a big baby." He was right. In March of 1880, after a long and difficult labor that lasted nearly a full day, Olivia gave birth to a baby boy who weighed nearly 10 pounds. Preston, who had been pacing outside the room while Mrs. Chen and the doctor attended to Olivia, nearly fainted when Mrs. Chen came out with the baby wrapped in a blanket. "You have a son," she said, handing the bundle to Preston. Preston looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and tears streamed down his weathered face. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." Mrs. Chen smiled, something she rarely did. "Your wife is asking for you. She is tired but doing well." Preston went into the room where Olivia lay propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling. He sat down carefully beside her and placed the baby in her arms. "Look what we made," he said softly. Olivia gazed down at their son, at the dark hair and the tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. "He is perfect," she said. "What should we name him?" They had talked about names for months, unable to decide. But now, looking at the baby, Preston said, "What about Thomas?" "After your father." Olivia looked at him in surprise. Her father had abandoned her, left her and her mother to struggle alone. But he had also given her this land, this place where she had found Preston and built a life. Maybe it was time to forgive. "Thomas," she said, trying it out. "Thomas Young. I like it." They called him Tommy, and he was the light of their lives. Preston was a devoted father, getting up in the middle of the night to walk the floor with the baby when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep, soft voice. Olivia watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again. As Tommy grew, it became clear he had inherited his father's size. He was a big baby, solid and strong, and he seemed to grow faster than normal. By his first birthday, he was already walking, tottering around the cabin on sturdy legs, getting into everything. Preston built him a wooden horse to ride, and Tommy spent hours playing with it, galloping around the yard and making neighing sounds. Life continued in its pleasant rhythm. Preston's partnership with Mr. Garrett flourished, and they were able to expand the cabin, adding 2 more rooms so Tommy could have his own space as he grew. Olivia's garden produced more every year, and she started selling her excess produce in town, earning a bit of extra money. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Tommy was 3, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the fall of 1883 she gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Grace, and she was small and delicate, the opposite of her brother in every way. She had Olivia's auburn hair and Preston's blue eyes, and from the moment she was born, Tommy was devoted to her. "My sister," he would say, toddling over to the cradle to look at her. "My baby sister." Preston was equally smitten. "I have a daughter," he said, holding the tiny baby with infinite care. "A daughter." The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays, of hard work and simple pleasures. Tommy grew tall and strong like his father, gentle and thoughtful. Grace grew into a spirited, clever girl who could charm anyone with her smile. They had a good life, the four of them, and Olivia often thought back to that day when she had stepped off the stagecoach in Stockton, alone and scared, and marveled at how much had changed. One evening, when Tommy was 12 and Grace was 9, they were all sitting on the porch watching the sunset, something they did most evenings when the weather was nice. Tommy was whittling a piece of wood, trying to make a bird like his father had taught him. Grace was sitting on Preston's lap, chattering about something that had happened at school. "Pa," Tommy said suddenly, looking up from his whittling, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, son," Preston said. "How did you and Ma meet? I mean, I know the story, but I want to hear it again." Preston looked at Olivia and smiled. "Well, it was a hot summer day, and I was riding out to check on this property because we had heard someone new had moved in. And when I got here, I saw the most beautiful woman I had ever laid eyes on, trying to fix a broken door with nothing but determination and stubbornness." "I was not stubborn," Olivia protested, laughing. "You were very stubborn," Preston said fondly, "and brave. You came out here with nothing, not knowing anyone, and you built a life. I was intimidated by you from the start." "You were intimidated," Tommy said skeptically, looking at his father's massive frame. "Your mother is fierce," Preston said seriously. "Physical size does not mean much compared to strength of character, and your mother has more strength in her little finger than most men have in their whole bodies." "Tell the part about how you whispered," Grace said. "That is my favorite part," Preston chuckled. "Well, I was worried I would frighten your mother. I knew I was big and I did not want her to be scared of me. So I took off my hat and spoke as quietly as I could, trying to show her I meant no harm." "And did it work?" Grace asked, even though she had heard this story many times. "It did," Olivia said, reaching over to take Preston's hand. "Your father was the gentlest giant I had ever met, and I fell in love with him right then and there, though I did not realize it at the time." "I fell in love with your mother that first day too," Preston said. "I just did not think I had a chance with someone like her." "But you did," Tommy said, grinning, "because you were brave enough to tell her how you felt." "That I did," Preston agreed. "Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Olivia looked at her family, at her tall son and her spirited daughter and her gentle husband, and she felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "What is wrong, Ma?" Grace asked, noticing the tears. "Nothing is wrong, sweetheart," Olivia said. "I am just happy, so very happy." Preston squeezed her hand, understanding in his eyes. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. This land, this home, this family. It was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. As the years continued to pass, Tommy and Grace grew into fine young adults. Tommy was tall like his father, though not quite as massive, and he had Preston's gentle nature and way with animals. He started working with the horses on the double bar, and it was clear he had inherited his father's skill. By the time he was 18, Mr. Garrett, who was getting older now, offered him a position as head trainer. Grace was 17 and beautiful, with her mother's intelligence and grace. She had been teaching at the small school in Stockton for a year, and the children adored her. She was courted by several young men in town, but she had not yet found anyone who interested her seriously. "I want what you and Pa have," she told Olivia one day as they were preparing dinner. "I want someone who will love me the way Pa loves you, someone gentle and strong and true." "You will find him," Olivia assured her, "when the time is right." Preston was in his early 40s now, still strong but showing signs of age. He had gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, though Olivia thought he was more handsome than ever. He still worked hard, but Mr. Garrett had promoted him to ranch manager, which meant less physical labor and more overseeing the operations. It was a good position, one that paid well and earned Preston the respect of everyone in the county. One autumn evening, Preston came home with news. "Mr. Garrett wants to retire," he said as they sat down to dinner. "He asked if I would be interested in buying the double bar from him. He would sell it to me at a fair price and I could pay him over time." Olivia set down her fork. "That is a huge opportunity. Do you want to do it?" Preston looked uncertain. "It would be a risk. We would be taking on debt. But it would also mean security for Tommy and Grace, something to pass on to them and their children." "Then we should do it," Olivia said firmly. "You have worked for that ranch for over 20 years. You have earned this opportunity." Tommy and Grace both agreed, excited at the prospect of their family owning the ranch. And so, in the spring of 1894, Preston Young became the owner of the Double Bar Ranch. It was a proud moment, one that felt like the culmination of all the hard work and sacrifice they had endured. The ranch prospered under Preston's management. He was fair with his workers, paying them good wages and treating them with respect, and in turn they worked hard for him. He expanded the horse breeding operation and added a small cattle herd. Within a few years, the Double Bar was one of the most successful ranches in the county. Grace married a young lawyer from Stockton when she was 20, a kind man named Robert who treated her like she was precious. They had a small house in town and within a year, a baby girl of their own. Olivia loved being a grandmother, and Preston doted on his granddaughter shamelessly. Tommy met a young woman named Sarah at a church social when he was 23. She was the daughter of a rancher from the next county over, and she shared Tommy's love of horses and the outdoors. They married the following spring, and Tommy built a house on the ranch property, close enough to his parents that they could help each other but far enough that everyone had their privacy. As Olivia and Preston entered their 50s, their lives settled into a comfortable rhythm once more. They had grandchildren to spoil, a successful ranch, and each other. They still sat on the porch most evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, just as they had for the past 30 years. One evening, as they sat together, Preston said, "Do you ever regret it? Coming out here, marrying me, the life we have built?" Olivia looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Preston, this life has been everything I could have wanted." "Why would you ask that?" he shrugged, looking a bit embarrassed. "I know it has not been easy. The work has been hard, and we have struggled at times. I have never been able to give you the fancy things you might have had if you had married someone else." Olivia took his face in her hands, looking into those blue eyes she loved so much. "Preston Young, you have given me everything that matters. A home, a family, love that has never wavered. I have never wanted fancy things. I wanted a life worth living, and that is exactly what you have given me." Preston smiled, that same bright smile that had stolen her heart so many years ago. "I love you, Olivia Young. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in front of that broken-down cabin, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Olivia said, kissing him softly. "My gentle giant. The biggest man I ever saw, with the biggest heart I have ever known." They sat together as the sun set, their hands entwined, surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch spread out around them, the home they had made from nothing but determination and love. They could hear their son's laughter from his house down the road, could see the lights of Stockton twinkling in the distance. It was a good life, a full life, and they had built it together. Years continued to pass, bringing with them more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Preston retired from active management of the ranch when he was in his 60s, turning it over to Tommy, though he still helped out when he could. He and Olivia spent their days tending to their garden, visiting with family, and enjoying the peace they had earned through a lifetime of hard work. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children running everywhere, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying bits and pieces of Preston and Olivia in their faces and their mannerisms. Grace had come from town with her husband and their grown children. Tommy and Sarah were there with their family. The house was full of laughter and love, exactly as it should be. As the sun began to set, Preston took Olivia's hand and led her out to the porch, away from the noise and bustle. They sat in their usual spot, the chairs worn smooth from decades of use, and looked out at the land that had been the backdrop of their entire life together. 50 years, Preston said softly. Hard to believe it has been that long. Best 50 years of my life, Olivia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies showing the wear of age, but their love was as strong as ever. Mine too, Preston agreed. Do you remember that first day I rode up here? You were so small and fierce, and I was terrified I would scare you just by being near you. You whispered so you would not frighten me, Olivia said, smiling at the memory. That was when I knew you were special. Any man that big and that gentle, who cared enough to be careful with my feelings, I knew he was worth keeping. I am glad you kept me, Preston said, wrapping his arm around her. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You have been my partner, my best friend, my everything. And you have been mine, Olivia said. When I came to Stockton all those years ago, I was so lost. I had nothing but a broken-down cabin and a dream of making something of myself. And then you appeared, this gentle giant of a man, and you showed me what it meant to have someone truly care about me. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and content, as the family celebrated inside. Children's laughter drifted through the windows and someone started playing a fiddle, the music bright and joyful. Dance with me, Preston said suddenly, standing and offering his hand. Out here. Olivia asked, but she was smiling as she took his hand. Why not? We have the best view in the county, and I want to dance with my wife on our anniversary. And so they danced on the porch, Preston holding Olivia carefully as they swayed to the distant music. His steps were slower now than they had been 50 years ago, and she was not as spry as she once was, but they moved together with the ease of a lifetime of partnership. The sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the sky with color, and Olivia thought she had never been happier than she was at that moment. When the music ended, Preston kissed her softly. Thank you, he said. For what? For taking a chance on me. For building this life with me. For loving me all these years. Thank you for being the man I always needed, Olivia replied. For being gentle when the world was hard. For whispering when you could have shouted. For loving me so well. They stood together on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars began to appear overhead. Inside, the party continued, but out here it was just the two of them, the way it had been so many evenings over the past 50 years. Two people who had found each other in the vast wilderness of the American West and built something beautiful together. As they finally went back inside to rejoin their family, Olivia looked around at all the faces, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she marveled at the legacy she and Preston had created. It had started with nothing but a broken cabin and a chance meeting with a big man who whispered so he would not frighten her, and it had grown into this: a family, a home, a life full of love. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Olivia and Preston lay in bed together. Preston's arm was around her, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I love you, Preston Young," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Olivia Young," he replied, his voice as soft as it had been that very first day. Always and forever. They fell asleep like that, holding each other, and Olivia's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she was the luckiest woman in the world. She had found her place in this wild land, and more importantly, she had found the love of her life in a gentle giant who had cared enough to whisper so he would not frighten her. The years that followed were quieter but no less sweet. Preston and Olivia grew old together, their bodies slowing down but their love never diminishing. They watched their family continue to grow and flourish, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would last beyond their lifetimes. Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Olivia beside him. His last words were her name, whispered with the same gentleness he had always shown her. The whole county turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect and affection he had earned over a lifetime of treating people fairly and kindly. Olivia grieved deeply, as was to be expected after 55 years of marriage, but she found comfort in her family and in the memories of the life they had shared. She lived for another 7 years, spending her days in the cabin Preston had built for her, tending to her garden and visiting with her great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the biggest man she had ever seen who had whispered so he would not frighten her, and about the love that had grown between them in this wild, beautiful land. When Olivia finally passed at the age of 85, she was buried beside Preston on a hillside overlooking the ranch. Their graves were simple, marked with plain headstones, but they were surrounded by wildflowers that bloomed every spring. The family made sure of that, knowing how much both Preston and Olivia had loved the beauty of the land. Tommy took over full ownership of the ranch, and he ran it with the same fairness and integrity his father had shown. Grace continued teaching in town until she retired, and her children and grandchildren remained in Stockton, part of the community their great-grandparents had helped build. The story of Preston and Olivia became part of the family lore, passed down through generations. It was a story of courage and love, of a woman who had the strength to build a life in the wilderness and a man who had the gentleness to love her well. It was a story of two people finding each other against all odds and creating something beautiful together. The cabin where it all began still stood decades later, preserved by the family as a reminder of where they came from. Children played in the yard where Olivia had once hung laundry and Preston had taught her to shoot. Couples sat on the porch where Preston and Olivia had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. It was a place of memory and love, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to face the world together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures on that porch, sitting close together, watching the sun set over the California hills. They said it was the ghosts of Preston and Olivia, still together after all these years, still in love, still building there forever in the place where their story began, but the family knew better. Preston and Olivia were not ghosts. They were memories, living on in the hearts of their descendants, in the land they had tended, in the love that still echoed through the ranch they had built together. They were the foundation upon which generations had been raised, the example of what true partnership looked like. Their great-great-grandchildren, playing in the yard of the house that had started as a broken-down cabin, carried their legacy forward. Some had Preston's height and gentle nature. Others had Olivia's fierce determination and auburn hair. All of them carried the knowledge that they came from something special, from a love that had started with a chance meeting and grown into something that would last forever. The Double Bar Ranch continued to prosper, adapting to changing times but always holding fast to the values Preston and Olivia had instilled: fairness, hard work, kindness, and respect for the land. It was a working ranch, not a museum, because that was what Preston would have wanted. He had believed in building something useful, something that would continue to provide for his family long after he was gone. On the 100th anniversary of Preston and Olivia's wedding, the family held a celebration at the ranch. Descendants came from all over California and beyond, some having moved away but all remembering where they came from. They gathered at the cabin, now carefully restored, and someone read from a journal Olivia had kept, her words bringing the past to life. The journal told the story of her arrival in Stockton, of her fear and determination, of meeting Preston and falling in love. It told of the struggles they had faced and the joys they had shared, of children born and grandchildren loved, of a life lived fully and well. And at the very end, written in Olivia's shaky hand just days before her death, were these words: "I came to this land with nothing and found everything. I found home. I found purpose. I found love in the form of a gentle giant who cared enough to whisper so he would not frighten me. If I could live my life again, I would not change a single thing, because every moment, good and bad, led me to Preston, and every moment with him was a gift." To whoever reads this in the future, know that love is real, that it is worth fighting for, and that it can transform even the hardest life into something beautiful. That is the legacy I leave behind, and I pray it continues through my children and their children, and all who come after. There was not a dry eye when the reading finished. People hugged and cried and celebrated, honoring the memory of the two people who had started it all. They told stories, shared memories, and recommitted themselves to the values Preston and Olivia had lived by. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold just as it had done 100 years before, the family gathered on the hillside where Preston and Olivia were buried. Someone placed fresh wildflowers on the graves, and they stood together in silence, paying tribute to the love that had started everything. The youngest member of the family, a little girl of 4 with auburn hair and blue eyes, placed a dandelion on Olivia's grave. "Great-great-great-grandma," she said in her small voice, "thank you for being brave." It was perfect, capturing everything that Preston and Olivia had been and everything they had meant. Brave enough to build a life in the wilderness. Brave enough to love deeply and completely. Brave enough to believe that two people, working together, could create something lasting and beautiful. And so the story ended where it began, with the land that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through everything. Preston and Olivia Young had lived and loved and left behind a legacy that would continue for generations. They had proven that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, even when life was hard and uncertain, love could flourish. All it took was the courage to reach for it, the strength to nurture it, and the gentleness to let it grow. The biggest man she had ever seen had whispered so he would not frighten her, and in doing so, he had won her heart. Together they had built a life, a family, a legacy. And that legacy, rooted in love and respect and partnership, would continue long after their names were forgotten by everyone except their own descendants. The ranch house lights came on as darkness fell, warm and welcoming, calling the family back for dinner and more celebration. But a few people lingered on the hillside, looking at the graves of Preston and Olivia, thinking about love and legacy and the lives that had been lived in this place. The wind rustled through the wildflowers, sounding almost like a whisper, gentle and loving. And if you believed in such things, you might imagine it was Preston, still whispering to his beloved Olivia, even after all these years. Still gentle, still careful, still utterly devoted. That was the story of Preston and Olivia Young, a love that had started with a whisper and grown into something that would echo through time, a testament to the power of gentleness and courage, and the transformative nature of true love.